The bride they mocked saw Mercy in the ranch's wildest horse. The black horse did not fear men because he was wild. He feared them because somewhere in his past, a man had taught him that a reaching hand could hurt worse than a whip. Clara Whitcomb understood that before any cowboy on Mercy Bend Ranch did. She stood beside the corral fence in the thin morning light, her plain gray dress lifting in the wind, her boots half buried in dust, and watched the stallion tear across the pen like a storm trapped inside a fence. He was tall, dark, and sharp-eyed, with a white mark down his face like a strip of moonlight. The men called him Gallows because they said every man who tried to ride him came close to meeting one. 2 hands had already been thrown hard enough to limp for weeks. One had left the ranch before breakfast the next day, pale with shame and shaking too badly to button his own coat. Since then, nobody crossed that fence unless they had a good reason and a better prayer. Clara had neither. She only had a quiet ache in her chest, and a strange feeling that the horse's anger was not anger at all. Behind her, near the barn, the ranch hands had stopped pretending to work. They watched her the way people watched a cracked lantern near dry hay, waiting for the fire. Silas Boone leaned against a post with his arms crossed. Young Eddie Pike stood beside him, chewing the inside of his cheek. Old Rufus Hale spat into the dirt and shook his head. "Maylord, her bride has been here 12 days, Rufus muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "Now she thinks she knows horses better than men who were born in saddles." Clara did not turn around. She had heard worse since arriving in Bridger's Hollow. She had heard them call her a desperate woman from back east. She had heard them wonder why Wyatt Harlan, owner of Mercy Bend, had married a stranger from a newspaper letter when half the widows in Montana would have gladly taken his name. She had heard them say she was too thin, too quiet, too soft-handed, too full of sorrow to last one hard winter. They were wrong about her hands. They only looked soft because she kept them clean. Before Montana, those hands had washed floors in a boarding house from dawn until dark. They had sewn burial clothes for her mother. They had held her younger brother through fever until he stopped breathing before sunrise. They had signed her name to a marriage promise because staying in Pennsylvania meant being swallowed by debts that were not even hers. Clara Whitcomb had crossed half a country to become Clara Harlan. But at Mercy Bend, a wedding ring had not made her a wife in anyone's eyes. It had only made her a question. Wyatt stepped beside her, his hat low, his jaw rough with a night's worth of beard. He smelled of leather, coffee, and cold air. He was not a cruel man. That was what made this new life harder in some ways. Cruelty was easy to hate. Kindness from a stranger was harder to trust. "You should stand farther back," he said. His voice was low, careful, not commanding. Clara looked at the stallion. Gallows had stopped running. He stood at the far side of the corral, sides heaving, one hoof pawing the dirt. His black ears were pinned flat. His eyes were fixed on Wyatt, then on the watching men, then back to Clara. "He does not like being stared at," she said. Wyatt glanced at her. "No horse likes being stared at." "This is different." A faint smile almost touched his mouth, but worry held it back. "You have spent 12 days on this ranch, Clara. And he has spent every day telling you the same thing, but none of you are listening." The words came out stronger than she meant them to. Behind her, Rufus gave a dry laugh. Silas shifted his weight. Eddie looked down at his boots. Wyatt did not laugh. That was one thing Clara had begun to notice about him. He listened even when he doubted. He watched even when others dismissed. It did not mean he understood her, but it meant he was trying. "What is he telling us?" Wyatt asked. Clara kept her eyes on the horse. "That he expects pain before it comes." For a moment, only the wind moved. It slipped through the rails, lifted loose dust, and made the old barn door groan on its hinges. Wyatt looked back toward Gallows. "He came from the Blackroot place. Owner died. Place sold off. I bought him at auction because I remembered seeing him once before back when he was younger. He was proud then, strong, clean moving, best horse I had seen in years. And when he came here, Wyatt's face tightened, mean as broken glass. Broken glass was whole once, Clara said. The words made Wyatt turn to her fully. He studied her as if he had just noticed something he had missed in the letters they had exchanged. Maybe he had imagined a grateful woman, one who would cook, mend, speak softly, and be glad for a roof. Maybe he had not expected a wife who looked at a dangerous horse and saw a wound. "I want to try with him," Clara said. "No." The answer came too fast. She turned then. "You asked me here to share your life. I asked you here to live, not get killed proving something to men who don't know when to hold their tongues." That silenced the hands for a breath. Clara felt a small warmth in her chest, but she did not let it soften her. This is not only about them. Wyatt's eyes narrowed slightly. Then what is it about? She looked at Gallows again. He had started pacing now, back and forth, wearing a line into the earth as if the corral were too small for all the fear inside him. "It is about knowing what it feels like when everyone has already decided what you are." Wyatt said nothing. Clara's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "They decided he is vicious. They decided I am useless. Maybe both of us are tired of being named by people who never bothered to understand us." The stallion suddenly screamed. The sound cut across the yard so sharply that Eddie stepped backward. Gallows charged the fence, dirt flying under his hooves, his dark body coming fast and hard. Wyatt grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her back. The horse slammed to a stop inches from the rails. Wood shook, dust rose, the men cursed. Clara's heart hammered, but she had seen it. Gallows had not looked at her. He had looked at Wyatt's hand on her arm. Slowly Clara whispered, "Let me go." Wyatt stared at her. "Clara, please." His grip loosened. The moment his hand left her sleeve, Gallows lowered his head a fraction. His ears flicked forward, then back. His breathing stayed hard, but the wild edge shifted into something else. Clara stood still. The whole ranch seemed to hold its breath. "He thought you were hurting me," she said softly. Wyatt looked from her to the horse, and for the first time since she had arrived at Mercy Bend, Clara saw real surprise on his face. Then Gallows took one slow step toward her. Gallows took one slow step toward Clara, and every man in the yard forgot how to breathe. The stallion's nostrils flared. His black coat shivered in the morning wind, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. Not soft, not safe, not tame. Clara knew better than to mistake one quiet moment for trust. A frightened creature could turn in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Still, she did not move. Wyatt stood a few feet behind her, tense as a drawn rope. She could feel his fear without looking back. It was not fear for himself. It was fear for her, and that made something inside her ache. No one had feared losing her in a very long time. "Clara," he said quietly, "come back now." She raised one hand just a little, not toward the horse, but toward Wyatt, asking him to wait. Gallows stopped. His ears twitched at the small motion. His head lifted. The spell almost broke. So Clara lowered her hand again and let silence settle over the yard. She had learned silence in sick rooms, in church pews, in train stations where no one knew her name. Silence could be empty, but it could also be a blanket, a door left open, a promise that nothing would be demanded too soon. The horse blew out a hard breath. Dust stirred under his muzzle. Then he turned away. Not running, not charging, just turning away because he had decided the moment was over. Only when he had crossed back to the center of the corral did Clara let herself breathe fully. Behind her, Rufus gave a rough cough. "Well, that don't mean nothing. Horse got curious, that's all." Clara faced him. "Curious is not nothing." Silas Boone pushed away from the barn post. He was broad through the shoulders, with a red neck and eyes that had spent too many years squinting into sun. A horse like that don't need curiosity. He needs a firm hand. He has had firm hands, Clara said. That is likely the trouble. Silas's mouth tightened. You saying we hurt him? I am saying he expects you to. The words landed hard. Eddie looked toward the ground. Rufus muttered something under his breath. Silas took one step forward, but Wyatt moved before he could take another. That's enough, Wyatt said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of ownership. Not just of the ranch, Clara thought, but of responsibility. Men obeyed Wyatt because he did not spend words carelessly. Silas held his stare for a moment, then looked away. Your ranch? Yes, Wyatt said, and she is my wife. The yard went still again, but this time the stillness felt different. Clara wished the words had filled her with simple comfort. Instead, they made her feel both protected and exposed. She did not want to be defended like property. She wanted to be seen like a person. Wyatt seemed to understand that a moment too late. His eyes shifted to her, regret passing over his face like a cloud. Clara turned back toward the corral. I do not want him forced. Rufus gave a short laugh. Then what do you want? To sing him hymns until he saddles himself? No, Clara said, I want time. Silas snorted. Time costs feed. So do broken ribs, she answered. Eddie let out a surprised little laugh before he caught himself. Silas shot him a look, and the boy went quiet. Wyatt rubbed a hand along his jaw. What would you do first? Clara looked at Gallows. The stallion had begun pacing again, but not as hard as before. His steps still cut the dust, but his head was lower now, his tail less sharp in its motion. I would stop trying to win, she said. Wyatt frowned. Explain that. You all walk up to that fence like the horse owes you obedience. You carry ropes. You bring saddles. You speak as if the end has already been chosen. She paused, choosing each word with care. He does not believe you are asking. He believes you are coming to take. Rufus folded his arms. That horse is ranch stock. Clara looked at him. And I am a wife. That does not mean I stopped being a soul. No one answered her. The words had come from a deeper place than she meant to show. For a second, she was not standing in Montana at all. She was back in the boarding house kitchen in Harrisburg, with steam burning her wrists and Mrs. Bell telling her that poor women should be thankful for any future offered to them. She was back at the small grave where her brother lay, hearing neighbors whisper that Clara would have to marry soon or become a burden. Then she blinked, and the Montana yard returned. Wyatt was watching her with that steady, troubled gaze of his. Go inside, he said, softer now. Warm up, we'll talk after breakfast. Clara almost refused out of pride, but her fingers were cold, and her knees had begun to tremble now that danger had passed. She nodded once and walked toward the house. The kitchen was dim and smelled of ashes. She stirred the stove awake, fed it kindling, and watched the first small flame catch. Her hands shook when she reached for the coffee tin. She pressed them flat on the table until they stilled. A few minutes later, Wyatt came in alone. He removed his hat but did not sit. Dust clung to his coat. The morning light cut across his face, showing the tired lines near his eyes. I handled that poorly, he said. Clara looked up. Calling you my wife like that, he continued. I meant to stop Silas from speaking rough to you, but I know how it sounded. And how did it sound? Like I was claiming you instead of standing beside you. She had not expected him to say it so plainly. That was the trouble with Wyatt Harlan. Just when she prepared herself to be disappointed, he did something honest. Yes, she said, that is how it sounded. He nodded, taking the correction without anger. Then I am sorry. Clara turned back to the stove because looking at him too long made her feel unsteady. In her old life, apologies from men were rare things. Most came dressed as excuses. Wyatt's apology stood bare in the room, asking for nothing. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one on the table. He sat then. For a while they drank in silence. At last Wyatt said, "There's something I didn't tell you about Gallows." Clara's hand tightened around her cup. "When I bought him, the auction man said the Blackroot owner died of fever. But later, one of the drovers told me there had been an accident before that. A young woman was hurt, maybe the owner's daughter, maybe a hired girl. The story kept changing." Clara felt the air in the kitchen grow colder. "What kind of accident?" Wyatt looked toward the window, where the far corral sat beyond the yard like a question waiting to be answered. "They said the horse was blamed for it." Outside, Gallows screamed again, but this time it did not sound like rage. It sounded like memory. The sound from the corral followed Clara through the rest of the morning. It rose once, sharp and broken, then died into the wind. After that, Gallows went quiet. Somehow that was worse. A raging horse could be understood by men who respected force. A silent one carried secrets. Clara worked in the kitchen with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, kneading dough harder than she needed to. Flour dusted her wrists. The stove gave off a steady warmth, but her thoughts stayed outside with the black stallion and the story Wyatt had not fully told. A young woman had been hurt. The horse had been blamed. That was all they knew, and it was not enough. In Clara's experience, people often blamed the thing that could not speak for itself. A poor girl, a stubborn wife, a dangerous horse. Anything silent made an easy place to hang guilt. By noon, the ranch hands came in for dinner. They entered with their usual noise, boots heavy, voices rough, chairs scraping the floor. Silas sat first, as if the kitchen belonged to him by habit. Rufus poured coffee without asking. Eddie hovered near the stove, careful not to meet Clara's eyes. Wyatt came in last. He noticed the tension at once. His gaze moved from Clara to the men, then back again. The meal was beans, fried potatoes, and bread still warm enough to steam when torn open. No one complained. Hunger had a way of making even proud men humble for a few minutes. Halfway through the meal, Rufus said, "That horse screamed like a ghost this morning." Clara kept her eyes on the plate she was clearing. Maybe ghosts are just memories that never found rest. Silas let out a low breath. There she goes again, turning a bad horse into a church sermon. Wyatt's fork stopped. Clara shook her head before he could speak. This was hers to answer. "No," she said, setting the plate down. "I am turning him into what he is, a living creature with a past." Silas leaned back in his chair. "A past don't make him safe. Neither does pretending he has none." Eddie looked between them, nervous as a colt near thunder. Rufus watched with faint amusement, but Silas's face hardened. "You think because he stood near you once you know him," Silas said. "That's how folks get hurt. They mistake a calm minute for a changed nature." Clara met his stare. "And you think because he hurt men once you know him forever." The kitchen went still. Silas's mouth tightened, but he had no quick answer. Clara could see that he was not an evil man. That would have been simpler. He was a man built from hard winters, hard work, and old rules that had never asked him to be gentle. To him, mercy looked like foolishness until it proved useful. Wyatt finally spoke. "After dinner, I'm riding to town." Clara turned to him. "Why?" "To ask about Blackroot Ranch. Somebody in Bridger's Hollow may know the real story." "I will come with you." "No," Silas said at once. Clara looked at him. He flushed under his beard. "Town ain't always kind to strangers." "Then it will feel familiar," she said. Rufus coughed into his cup, hiding a laugh. Eddie smiled before looking down. Wyatt studied Clara for a long moment. "It may stir talk." "Wyatt," she said quietly, "they are already talking." That settled it. After the meal, Clara washed quickly and changed into her dark blue traveling dress. the one she had worn the day she stepped off the stagecoach and saw Mercy Bend for the first time. The hem still held a faint stain from that day's mud. She left it there. Some marks deserved to remain. Wyatt hitched the wagon himself. Gallows watched from the far corral as they passed. Clara turned her head toward him, and for one breath, horse and woman looked at each other across the yard. "I am going to find out what they did to you," she whispered. Wyatt heard her but said nothing. The road to Bridger's Hollow cut through open land washed pale by the afternoon sun. Dry grass bent in the wind. A hawk circled above the ridge. The wagon wheels creaked over ruts, and Clara held the sideboard when the trail dipped. Wyatt drove with both hands loose on the reins. He did not fill the silence, and she was grateful. Silence beside him was beginning to feel less like distance and more like room. After a while he said, "You handled Silas well." "I do not want to handle him. I want him to think." "That may be harder." Clara almost smiled. "Then I will have to be patient with him too." Wyatt looked at her sidelong. "You plan on gentling my whole ranch?" "No," she said, "only the parts that keep kicking at me." This time he did smile, small and real. Bridger's Hollow appeared as a scatter of wooden buildings pressed against the wide land. A general store, a livery, a church with a leaning bell, a jail, and a saloon with faded green doors. People turned as the wagon rolled in. Clara felt their eyes before she saw their faces. Some stared because she was new. Some because she was Wyatt Harlan's unexpected wife. Some because small towns fed on questions when bread ran low. Wyatt helped her down in front of the general store. His hand touched hers briefly, steady and warm. He let go before it could feel like possession. Inside, the store smelled of coffee beans, lamp oil, and wool. A woman behind the counter looked up sharply. She was thin, with silver hair pinned tight and spectacles hanging from a chain around her neck. "Wyatt Harlan," she said, "I wondered when you would come asking." Wyatt removed his hat. "Afternoon, Mrs. Bellamy." The woman's eyes moved to Clara, not unkind but measuring. "And this must be your bride." "My wife," Wyatt said. Clara felt the difference this time. Not a claim, a correction. Mrs. Bellamy nodded. "Clara, is it?" "Yes, ma'am." "You came about that Blackroot horse." Clara stepped forward. "We came about the woman who was hurt." Mrs. Bellamy's face changed. Something guarded passed over it. For a moment, the store seemed to shrink around them. Then the woman reached beneath the counter and pulled out a folded newspaper, yellowed at the edges. She placed it down slowly, as if it were heavier than paper ought to be. "Her name was Abigail Moore," Mrs. Bellamy said. "And if you want the truth, you had best understand this first. That horse was not the only one blamed because it was easier than blaming a man." Clara's fingers went cold. And for those of you staying with Clara through this hard truth, remember this. Sometimes the quietest soul in the story is carrying the heaviest secret. Stay with her now, because what happened at Blackroot Ranch is not finished reaching into Mercy Bend. Clara looked down at the yellowed newspaper as if it might burn her fingers. The print was faded, the edges worn soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. Near the center was a small notice, no larger than a church announcement. It did not seem big enough to hold a ruined life. Wyatt leaned closer, his shoulder almost touching hers. Mrs. Bellamy did not rush them. She stood behind the counter with her hands folded, her face set in the weary way of a woman who had watched a town choose comfort over truth. Clara read slowly. There had been an accident at Blackroot Ranch in early spring. Abigail Moore, age 19, had been injured near the lower barn during an attempt to move a young stallion. The animal was blamed for spooking, breaking loose, and causing the wagon beside the barn to overturn. Mr. Silas Blackroot, owner of the ranch, had declared the horse dangerous. The article ended by saying Abigail was sent east to relatives for recovery. "That is all?" Clara asked. Mrs. Bellamy's mouth tightened. "That is all they printed." Wyatt's voice was low, but not all that happened. "No." Outside, a wagon rolled past the store window, wheels rattling over dry boards. Clara watched shadows move across the glass. For a moment, she felt the whole town leaning in, listening through the walls. Mrs. Bellamy lifted the newspaper and folded it again, slower this time. Abigail worked for Sela's Blackroot after her mother died. Cooked, cleaned, helped with the horses when needed. She had a gentle way with animals. Folks thought she was quiet, but quiet is not the same as simple. Clara knew that better than most. She loved that black horse, Mrs. Bellamy continued. Called him Midnight Psalm, said he listened better than people. Gallows, Clara whispered. The name felt cruel now, a joke made by men who had not known what he used to be. Wyatt looked pained. I never heard that name. Because Blackroot made sure nobody used it after the accident, Mrs. Bellamy said. Said the horse had turned wicked. Said Abigail paid the price for trusting him. Clara folded her arms against the sudden chill in her chest. And you believe that was a lie? Mrs. Bellamy's eyes sharpened. I believe Abigail came into this store 2 days before it happened with a bruise on her wrist shaped like fingers. I believe she asked if there was work in town. I believe she was afraid of something at that ranch, and it was not the horse. Wyatt went still. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Clara felt a slow anger rise in her, not hot and wild, but cold enough to steady her hands. She had seen that kind of fear in boarding house girls who smiled too quickly when certain men entered a room. She had seen it in women at church who said they had slipped on steps, walked into doors, tripped over nothing. What happened to Abigail? Clara asked. Mrs. Bellamy looked toward the window before answering. She survived, that much I know, but she never came back to Bridger's Hollow. A cousin came through 2 months later and said Abigail could walk again, but she would not speak of Blackroot Ranch. And Blackroot? Wyatt asked. Died before summer. Fever, they said. Maybe it was. Maybe guilt caught up with him in a form folks could name. Wyatt picked up his hat from the counter, turning it in his hands. Do you know where Abigail went? Mrs. Bellamy hesitated. Clara saw it, not ignorance, fear. Ma'am, Clara said softly, that horse is still living inside whatever happened there. If Abigail can tell us the truth, maybe we can help him. The older woman studied her for a long moment. You care that much about a horse? I care about what happens when a living thing is blamed because it cannot explain itself. Mrs. Bellamy's face changed then. The guarded look loosened, just a little. She reached beneath the counter again and pulled out a small envelope tied with a brown thread. She wrote me once, she said. Not long, not friendly, just enough to say she was alive and asking me not to answer unless there was real need. Wyatt stepped back. You have her direction. I had it. Mrs. Bellamy untied the thread and opened the envelope. But this letter is 5 years old. She may not be there anymore. She handed the paper to Clara. The writing was small and careful. Clara did not read the whole letter. It felt private, and some wounds did not need strangers digging through them. She only looked at the place written near the bottom. Willow Creek Mission House, Helena Road. Wyatt exhaled slowly. That is a day's ride from here. More if the weather turns, Mrs. Bellamy said. And it will. My knees have been aching since dawn. Clara almost smiled despite the heaviness in the room. My mother used to say old bones know the sky before young eyes see it. Mrs. Bellamy gave her a faint look of approval. Your mother sounds like she had sense. She had fear, Clara said. Sometimes people mistake one for the other. Mrs. Bellamy did not answer, but she seemed to understand. When Clara and Wyatt stepped back outside, the town felt different. The buildings were the same, the dusty road the same, the horses tied at posts the same. But Clara now saw how easily a place could cover a truth with ordinary noise. A bell over a shop door, men laughing in a saloon, women buying flour, a young woman gone, a horse condemned, and everyone moving on because moving on was easier than looking back. Wyatt helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. He did not start the team right away. "You still want to work with him?" he asked. Clara turned toward him, more than before. His hands tightened on the reins. "This may not end the way you hope." "I know. Abigail may not talk to us. She may not even be there." "I know that too. And Gallows may never become safe." Clara looked toward the road leading out of town, where the land opened wide and lonely beneath a sky already gathering clouds. "Then we will at least stop calling him by a name that was given to him after someone else's lie." Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. Then he clicked his tongue to the horses, and the wagon rolled forward. They had almost reached the edge of town when a man stepped out from beside the livery. He was thin, gray-coated, with a scar near his chin and eyes that did not blink enough. He watched Clara the way a wolf watched a weak place in a fence. Wyatt's posture changed. The man smiled without warmth. "Going around asking about Blackroot, are you?" he called. Wyatt stopped the wagon. Clara's pulse tightened. The stranger rested one hand on the wagon rail and looked straight at her. "Best leave buried things buried, Mrs. Harlan," he said. "Some truths bite harder than horses." Wyatt's hand moved to the wagon rail, not fast, not threatening, but firm enough to make the stranger notice. "Take your hand off my wagon," Wyatt said. The man looked at him, then at Clara, and smiled as if he knew something private and ugly. Slowly, he lifted his hand and stepped back. "Easy, Harlan. I only came with friendly advice." "Friendly advice does not sound like a warning," Clara said. His eyes settled on her again. They were pale and restless, the kind of eyes that searched a person for weakness. "You are new here, Mrs. Harlan. New folks sometimes confuse curiosity with courage. And old folks sometimes confuse silence with peace." The stranger's smile faded. Wyatt shifted beside her. "Who are you?" "Name is Clay Danner. I worked Blackroot for a spell." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Then you knew Abigail Moore." A small twitch moved near Clay's eye. "Lots of people knew that girl." "That was not an answer," Clara said. Clay looked toward the town behind them, where a few faces had appeared in windows and doorways. Nobody came closer. That told Clara enough. The man was known here, and not in a way that made people brave. Clara felt Wyatt go still. She laid a hand lightly on his sleeve, not to stop him because she thought Clay deserved patience, but because anger might give the man what he wanted. "What did she know better?" Clara asked. Clay's gaze sharpened. For the first time she saw something under his mean little confidence. Fear. "You ask too many questions." "No," Clara said. "I ask the ones everyone else avoided." The wind moved dust between them. Somewhere near the livery, a horse stamped and rattled a bit chain. Clay stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That stallion ruined Blackroot, hurt the girl, near killed a man. If Harlan has sense, he will put the beast down before it brings the same curse to Mercy Bend." Wyatt's voice came cold. "A horse does not curse a ranch." Clay looked at him. "No, but secrets do." Then he turned and walked away, his coat lifting in the wind like a dark wing. Wyatt watched him until he disappeared behind the saloon. Clara watched the town watching them. The faces pulled back from windows, doors closed. Life resumed with the false calm of people pretending they had not seen a thing. Only when the road opened ahead did Wyatt urge the team forward. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The wagon creaked over the hard road. Clouds thickened above the hills, bruised gray at their bellies. Clara held the folded letter from Mrs. Bellamy in her lap, her thumb resting over Abigail Moore's written direction. At last Wyatt said, "I should not have brought you to town." Clara turned to him. That is the wrong lesson. He gave her a hard look. A man like Clay Danner does not warn without reason. Then we should find the reason. Clara. No, her voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut. Do not put me back in the kitchen because a cruel man spoke my name like a threat. I have lived under threat before. It becomes a room with no door unless you make one. Wyatt's face changed. Who threatened you? The question came softly, but Clara was not ready for it. Not fully. There were stories in her past she had folded away like old letters, not because they no longer hurt, but because she could not carry them open every day. My mother owed money after my father died, she said. Men came to collect what she did not have. One of them decided I could be part of the payment. Wyatt's grip tightened on the reins. He did not touch me, Clara said quickly. Not because he was decent, because I ran. Because my brother was sick and cried out and a neighbor came. After that, my mother said I needed a husband before worse luck found me. The wagon rolled on. I answered your advertisement because I wanted a door, she continued. Not comfort, not romance, a door. Wyatt looked straight ahead. His voice was rough when he spoke. I am sorry the world made you choose survival so young. Something in Clara's chest trembled. She looked away toward the open land because kindness could undo her faster than cruelty. When they reached Mercy Bend, the ranch looked restless under the coming storm. The hands had gathered near the barn, their faces turned toward the far corral. Gallows was pacing hard again. No, Clara thought. Not Gallows. Midnight Psalm. The name rose in her like a small flame. She climbed down before Wyatt could help her and walked toward the corral. The men turned as she passed. Silas frowned. Rufus spat. Eddie watched with wide eyes. Clara, Wyatt called, wait. But she did not go close to the fence. She stopped at the same safe distance as before and faced the black stallion. Midnight, she said. The horse's head snapped toward her. Every man heard the change in the yard. Clara's breath caught. She had not expected it, not so soon, not so clear. The old name had reached him like a hand from another life. Midnight Psalm, she said again, softer. The stallion stopped pacing. His body remained tense, but he was listening, truly listening. His ears pushed forward. His nostrils opened and closed as if he were searching the air for a ghost. Wyatt came to stand beside Clara, but he kept careful space between them this time. Behind them, Eddie whispered, "How did she do that?" Clara did not answer. She only stood there with tears threatening her eyes, because for one moment the horse was not a monster, not a danger, not a problem to be solved. He was a creature hearing the name of the girl who had loved him. If this moment touched your heart, stay with Clara and Midnight a little longer, because some names are not just names. Some names are the first road back home. Silas came forward slowly. Where did you hear that? Clara turned. From someone who remembered who he was before fear changed him. Silas looked uneasy. A name will not make him safe. No, Clara said, but it proves something survived. That evening the storm broke. Rain hit the roof in hard silver lines. Wind pressed against the windows. The ranch house smelled of stew, wet wool, and lamp smoke. The men ate quieter than usual, glancing now and then toward Clara as if she had brought back more from town than a name. She felt the letter in her pocket all through supper. Willow Creek Mission House. Abigail might still be there, or she might be gone. Either way, the road to truth had opened, and Clara knew she would follow it. Near midnight, a sound tore through the storm. Not thunder. A horse screaming. Wyatt was on his feet before Clara reached the door. Together, they ran into the rain, lantern light jumping wildly in Wyatt's hand. The far corral gate was open, and Midnight Psalm was gone. Rain swallowed the yard until the whole ranch looked like a memory being washed away. Wyatt lifted the lantern higher, but the light only reached a few feet before the storm tore it apart. Mud sucked at Clara's boots. Her hair had slipped loose from its pins, and wet strands clung to her cheeks, but she did not feel the cold yet. All she could see was the open corral gate swinging in the wind. Midnight Psalm was gone. Silas came running from the bunkhouse half-dressed, coat thrown over his nightshirt, rifle in hand. Rufus followed with a second lantern. Eddie stumbled behind them, pale and frightened. "What happened?" Silas shouted. Wyatt strode to the gate and grabbed it before the wind could slam it again. He bent close, lantern near the latch. Clara came beside him. The latch had not broken. It had been lifted. Wyatt's face went hard. Someone opened it. The words struck the men silent. Rain ran down Silas's beard. Who would be fool enough to turn that beast loose in a storm? Clara looked toward the dark line of the road beyond the yard. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt. Clay Danner. She did not say the name at first. Saying it would make it real, and real things demanded action. Wyatt saw the thought on her face anyway. Danner. Silas frowned. That Blackroot hand from town. He warned us today, Clara said. He said buried things should stay buried. Rufus spat rainwater from his mouth. Sounds like a guilty man talking. Wyatt swung toward the barn. Saddle the horses. Clara moved with him. I am coming. No, Wyatt said at once. She stopped in the rain. Do not begin that again. This is different. It is dark. The ground is bad. That horse is frightened and loose. And he may answer to me. Wyatt turned back. His eyes were shadowed beneath his hat, but the lantern showed enough. Fear was there. Love too, though neither of them had learned how to hold that word between them without trembling. You cannot ride out after him in this storm, he said. Clara stepped closer, rain dripping from her chin. I am not asking to prove anything to your men tonight. I am asking because Midnight is scared, and whoever opened that gate wanted him scared. If men chase him with ropes and rifles, they will turn him into the monster everyone already believes he is. Silas shifted behind them. She may be right. Wyatt looked at him in surprise. The old hand grimaced. Don't make me say it twice. There was no time for more argument. Wyatt gave one sharp nod. You ride with me, not alone. You do exactly what I say if danger comes. Clara did not like being ordered, but she liked less the thought of Midnight vanishing into the storm. Agreed. Within minutes they were mounted and moving. Wyatt rode a steady bay named Preacher. Clara rode a smaller chestnut mare called Mercy, sure-footed and patient. Silas and Rufus came behind them, while Eddie stayed to check the other gates and keep the house lit. The trail was nearly gone beneath rain and mud, but Midnight had left deep tracks where he had bolted from the corral. They cut toward the north pasture first, then veered west toward the creek bottoms. Clara held tight to the reins. The storm slapped cold water against her face. More than once Mercy's hooves slid and Clara's stomach lurched, but the mare caught herself each time. Wyatt rode ahead, lantern swinging from his saddle horn. He looked back often, not to doubt her, she realized, but to make sure she was still there. That small difference mattered. After half a mile, Silas called out, "Track split." Wyatt pulled up. In the mud near a stand of cottonwoods, hoofprints scattered wildly. Some belonged to Midnight, others did not. Wyatt dismounted and crouched. Clara slid down too, landing ankle-deep in mud. She came near as he lowered the lantern. "Another horse," Wyatt said. "Danner?" Clara asked. "Likely." Rufus cursed softly. He drove the stallion out. Clara stared at the churned earth. The story was clear enough even to her inexperienced eyes. Midnight had run hard. Another rider had pushed him, cutting back and forth, driving him away from the ranch and toward the creek. "Why?" she whispered. Wyatt's face was grim. A loose, dangerous horse gets shot. A dead horse keeps its secrets. Lightning flashed. For 1 white second, the world became clear. Clara saw the creek below, swollen with rain. She saw trees bending in the wind, and on the far bank, black against the pale flash of sky, she saw midnight. He stood near the broken remains of an old footbridge, sides heaving, mane whipped wild by the storm. Another rider was there too, higher on the slope. Clay Danner sat hunched in his saddle, a rope in one hand. Then darkness crashed back. "There," Clara cried. Wyatt swung into his saddle. "Stay behind me." They rode down the slope, but the mud slowed them. Clay saw their lanterns and jerked his horse around. He did not come toward them. He drove his mount at midnight with a shout. The stallion reared. His scream tore through the storm. Clay raised the rope. "No," Clara shouted. She kicked Mercy forward before anyone could stop her. The little mare plunged down the slope, sliding more than running. Wyatt called Clara's name behind her, but she kept her eyes on midnight. The stallion was trapped between the swollen creek and the rider pressing him from above. If he bolted the wrong way, he would go into the water. "Midnight Psalm," Clara cried. The old name cut through rain, thunder, and fear. The stallion's head snapped toward her. Clay turned too, his face twisted when he saw her. "Fool woman." He swung the rope. Clara did not think. She threw herself from Mercy's saddle into the mud and stood with both hands open at her sides. "Midnight," she called again, voice breaking. "Not him, look at me." The stallion pawed the ground. Water rushed behind him. Clay cursed and pulled his horse closer. Wyatt was coming fast now, Silas and Rufus behind him. Clay saw them and panicked. He snapped the rope toward midnight one more time. The stallion lurched backward. His rear hoof slipped over the creek bank. Clara's breath stopped. For one terrible moment, the great black horse fought the collapsing mud beneath him, eyes wide, body trembling between land and flood. Then Clara stepped forward into the rain and whispered, "I know you are afraid, but you have to choose me now." Midnight Psalm's great body trembled on the edge of the creek bank. Mud broke beneath his rear hoof and slid into the dark water below. The creek was swollen from the storm, rushing fast and brown, carrying branches, foam, and broken reeds. One wrong move would pull him down into it. One shout, one rope, one careless hand, and fear would finish what cruelty had started years ago. Clara stood in the rain with both palms open. "Look at me," she said. Her voice was not loud now. It could not fight the thunder, so it did not try. It only reached for the small space between panic and trust. Midnight's eyes rolled toward her. Clay Danner cursed from above, "Get away from him." Wyatt swung down from his horse, but Clara heard him stop. He did not rush forward. He did not grab her arm. He did not try to save her from the choice she had already made. That mattered. Even through terror, it mattered. "Midnight," Clara whispered again. "You are not there anymore." The stallion's front legs stiffened. His nostrils flared. Rain ran down his black face and gathered on the white mark between his eyes. He looked like some creature carved out of night and lightning. "You are not a Blackroot," Clara said, "and I am not Abigail." At the sound of that name, Midnight jerked his head. Clay went still. Clara saw it even through the rain. His shoulders tightened. His hand dropped slightly on the rope. Wyatt saw it too. "You knew her," Wyatt said, voice hard. Clay turned his horse halfway, eyes darting toward the ridge, then the creek, then the men closing in behind him. Silas and Rufus had dismounted now. They moved carefully, keeping their hands visible, not wanting to spook the stallion more. Clay gave a bitter laugh. Everyone knew Abigail. "No," Clara said, "you feared her." The words slipped out before she fully understood them, but the moment she spoke, she knew they were true. Clay Danner had not followed them because of a horse. He had followed them because one old name had been brought back into the light. Clay's face twisted. "You don't know a thing." "I know you opened the gate." "Prove it." Wyatt took one step forward. "The latch was lifted. Your tracks are in the mud. You drove him here." Clay's horse danced under him, nervous from the storm and the anger in its rider. Midnight flinched at the movement. More mud gave way beneath his hoof. Clara's breath caught. "Stop talking," she said sharply. Everyone froze. Not because Clara had raised her voice, but because Midnight had begun to sink lower at the edge. His front legs were braced, muscles shaking from the strain. He could not hold that position much longer. Clara moved one slow step closer. Wyatt's hand lifted slightly, then lowered. She could feel how badly he wanted to stop her, but he held himself still. "Good boy," Clara breathed. "Good, brave boy." Midnight's ears flicked toward her. "I am going to step to the side," she said, as if he understood every word. "Not toward you, not behind you, just here." She moved again, angling away from the creek, giving him a path that was not blocked by men, rope, or water. The stallion watched. His sides heaved, his whole body trembled, but his eyes stayed on her. Clara took another step. Her boot slipped in the mud and she nearly fell. Wyatt made a small sound behind her, but he did not move. Midnight snorted. For one strange second, Clara thought the horse had noticed her fear and was answering it with his own. "Yes," she whispered, "I am scared too." That was the truth. Her knees shook. Her hands were numb. Her heart felt too large for her ribs, but fear did not mean she had to run. Fear only meant the moment mattered. She stopped beside a patch of firmer ground, leaving a wide open space between herself and Midnight. "Come this way," she said. "You choose." The storm roared over them. Midnight lifted one front hoof, then set it down again. His rear legs slid another inch. The bank crumbled. Clay's horse jerked backward and Clay pulled at the reins with a curse. Midnight screamed. Clara did not think of danger then. She thought of a young woman named Abigail standing in a barn, loving a horse nobody else had protected. She thought of the boarding house door she had once run through to save herself. She thought of every living thing that had been blamed for being afraid. "Midnight Psalm," she cried, and this time her voice broke through the rain. "Come." The stallion lunged. Mud flew, water splashed high. For one awful breath he seemed to fall backward into the creek. Then his front hooves struck firmer ground. His powerful shoulders surged. With a violent heave, he pulled himself away from the breaking bank and staggered toward Clara's open path. Clara stood still as death. Midnight came past her so close the heat of him rolled against her through the rain. He did not touch her. He did not strike. He only passed, wild and shaking, then stopped 10 feet away with his head low and his breath tearing from him. No one moved. Then Rufus whispered, "Lord above." Wyatt came to Clara's side slowly. He did not grab her. He only stood near enough that she could feel him there. "You did it," he said. Clara's eyes filled, but she kept watching Midnight. "He did it. I only gave him somewhere else to go." A sudden thud broke the moment. Clay had turned his horse toward the ridge, trying to flee. Silas moved first, catching the bridle before the animal could bolt. Rufus came up on the other side. Clay struggled, but the mud and the frightened horse betrayed him. "Let go," Clay snapped. Silas pulled him down from the saddle with no more force than needed. Clay landed hard in the mud, breathing fast, his face pale now that the others had him. Wyatt stepped toward him. "Why?" Clay spat rainwater. "Because that horse should have been put down years ago." "That is not why," Clara said. Clay looked at her, and the hate in his eyes was thin now, stretched over fear. Clara took one step closer. What did Abigail see? The storm seemed to quiet around the question. Clay's mouth opened, then closed. Wyatt's voice dropped. "Answer her." Clay looked toward Midnight, then away. She saw Blackroot take a branding iron to that horse after it threw him, he said at last. She tried to stop him. The old man shoved her. Wagon wheel caught. Horse broke loose. Everything went bad. Clara felt the world tilt. So Midnight did not hurt Abigail, she whispered. Clay's face crumpled with bitterness. No, he tried to get away. Lightning flashed over the creek, showing Midnight standing in the rain, trembling but alive. And Clara knew the truth had only begun. No one tried to put a rope on Midnight's psalm that night. That was Clara's first victory after the creek. The storm still battered the trees, and the mud made every step slow, but Wyatt did not reach for a halter. Silas did not raise his hands. Rufus did not mutter about bullets or broken bones. They all stood in the rain and looked at the black stallion as if they were seeing him for the first time. Not as a curse. Not as a killer. As a wounded creature who had been carrying another man's sin across 5 long years. Clay Danner sat in the mud with Silas gripping the back of his coat. His face had gone gray beneath the rain. All the sharpness had leaked out of him now that the truth had found air. Wyatt looked down at him. You let that horse take the blame. Clay wiped rain from his mouth. Blackroot owned the ranch, owned the horse, paid my wages. What was I supposed to do? Tell the truth, Clara said. Clay laughed once, but there was no strength in it. Truth does not feed a man. No, Clara answered, but lies starve everything around them. Wyatt turned to Rufus. Take him back. Lock him in the old feed room until morning. Then I'm riding him to the sheriff. Clay jerked his head up. You cannot prove a thing. Clara stepped closer. Rain slid down her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. Maybe not yet. Something in her tone made him look away. That was when Clara knew there was more. Midnight stood several yards off, shivering hard, his head low. The wild fire had gone out of him for the moment, leaving only exhaustion. Clara wanted to go to him, wanted to lay a hand against his wet neck and tell him the worst was over. But she did not. Wanting comfort was not the same as being ready to receive it. So she simply turned toward the ranch road. Come home, she said softly. Then she began walking. At first, nothing happened. Wyatt mounted Preacher but kept the horse slow. Silas dragged Clay toward Rufus's horse. Rufus grumbled under his breath, but even he moved carefully, as if the night had made him ashamed of every hard word he had ever spoken about the stallion. Clara walked beside Mercy, holding the mare's reins loosely. Behind her, Midnight snorted. She did not turn. Another step, then another. The mud sucked at her boots. Rain beat against her shoulders. Her dress clung heavy around her legs. She felt emptied out, like all her courage had been spent at the creek bank and only stubbornness remained. Then she heard it. One hoofstep behind her. Then another. Wyatt saw first. His face changed in the lantern light, but he said nothing. Clara kept walking. Midnight's psalm followed them home with no rope, no command, no force. He stayed 20 paces behind Clara, sometimes stopping, sometimes tossing his head at the thunder, but always coming on again when she spoke his name. By the time the ranch lights appeared through the rain, Eddie was standing on the porch with a lantern held high. His mouth fell open when he saw the stallion walking loose behind them. Silas put Clay in the feed room and barred the door. Rufus went with him, less rough than he might have been earlier that day. Wyatt opened the far corral gate wide and stepped back. Clara stopped outside it. Midnight stopped too. For a moment, man, woman, and horse stood in the storm, facing the old prison that had held him. Clara wondered if he would refuse. She would not blame him. A corral, even a safe one, was still a fence. We will not shut you in the same way, she whispered. Not forever. Midnight watched her. Then he walked past her through the gate. Wyatt closed it gently. Not with triumph, with respect. That night no one slept much. Clay shouted twice from the feed room, then went silent. Midnight stood near the fence, but he did not pace. Clara watched him from the kitchen window while the coffee went cold in her hands. Eddie came in near dawn, hat twisted between his fingers. "Mrs. Harlan." Clara turned. He swallowed. "I am sorry." "For what?" Clara studied him, seeing takes practice. He nodded, grateful for the mercy. If you believe one act of patience can change the course of a life, hold that thought close as this story moves forward. Some hearts do not open because they are forced. They open because someone finally stops trying to break them. By mid-morning, the rain had passed, leaving the world washed and raw beneath a pale sky. Wyatt sent Rufus to fetch the sheriff. Silas stayed behind to watch Clay, though Clara noticed he no longer looked proud of holding the key. After breakfast, Clara found Wyatt in the barn saddling Preacher. "You are going to Willow Creek," she said. He looked at her. "We are." The word warmed her more than the coffee had. Silas surprised them both by stepping from the tack room. "I should come too." Wyatt frowned. "Why?" The old hand looked toward the far corral. Midnight stood at the fence, watching them with tired eyes. "Because I was wrong," Silas said. "And if that girl Abigail has truth to tell, she deserves to say it in front of a man who would have called her a liar yesterday." No one spoke for a moment. Then Clara nodded. "Then come." The ride to Willow Creek Mission House took most of the day. The road climbed through wet hills and narrow stands of pine. By the time they reached the mission, the sun was low and gold behind the clouds. A woman stood in the yard, helping two little girls carry firewood. She was not old, but pain had aged the way she held herself. One leg dragged slightly. A cane rested against the porch rail. Her brown hair was streaked with early silver, and when she looked up at the riders, her face went still. Clara knew before anyone spoke. "Abigail Moore." Wyatt dismounted slowly. "Miss Moore." The woman's eyes moved from Wyatt to Silas, then to Clara. Fear flickered there, old but alive. "I have nothing to say about Blackroot Ranch," Abigail said. Clara stepped down from Mercy and walked forward alone. "We came because of Midnight Psalm." Abigail's hand flew to her mouth. All the color left her face. "He is alive," she whispered. Clara's eyes filled despite herself. "Yes," and he remembered his name. Abigail gripped the porch rail, as if the world had shifted under her feet. Then she said the words that made even Silas bow his head. "Then he has waited longer for justice than I have." Abigail Moore said Midnight Psalm's name, as if it had been locked behind her teeth for 5 years. No one moved in the mission yard. The two little girls carrying firewood stared at the strangers with wide eyes until a gray-haired sister in a brown wool shawl came from the porch and gently led them inside. The door closed softly behind them, but not before Clara caught the smell of soup, clean soap, and wood smoke. A safe place, she thought. Or as safe as the world allowed. Abigail still held the porch rail. Her fingers had gone white around the wood. She looked at Wyatt, then at Silas, and her face hardened when her gaze found the old cowboy. "You worked Mercy Bend," she said. Silas removed his hat. "Still do." "Then you are not one of Blackroot's men." "No, ma'am." "But you believed what they said." Silas's weathered face tightened with shame. "Yes, ma'am." Abigail looked away, and that small motion struck Clara harder than anger would have. Anger meant some part of a wound still had strength. This was weariness. This was what happened when truth had been left alone too long. Clara stepped closer, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. "You do not owe us your story." Abigail's eyes returned to her. "But if you can bear to tell it," Clara continued, "there is a horse at Mercy Bend who still lowers his head when anyone raises a hand." Abigail's mouth trembled. For a moment, Clara thought she would turn and go inside. Instead, Abigail reached for the cane beside the porch rail. She took it in one hand, gathered her balance, and came down the steps slowly. Each movement carried pain but also dignity. She did not ask for help. No one offered it. Clara understood that too. Some people needed assistance. Others needed witnesses. They followed Abigail to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree stripped nearly bare by the season. The mission sat quiet behind them, its windows catching late sunlight. A small bell hung near the door. Beyond the yard, the Helena road stretched pale and empty toward the hills. Abigail sat. Clara sat beside her. Wyatt and Silas remained standing a respectful distance away. For a while, Abigail only looked at her hands. "He was never mean," she said at last. "Not once. Midnight was proud and he had spirit, but he was not cruel. He liked apples cut in quarters, would not take them whole. I used to tell him he had manners better than most men at Blackroot." A faint smile touched her face and vanished. Silas Blackroot bought him young, wanted to turn him into a show of power. Big black stallion, sharp as a blade, strong enough to make every rancher in the county envy him. But Mr. Blackroot did not understand horses. He understood ownership. Clara glanced at Wyatt. His eyes had lowered. Abigail went on. He thought obedience meant fear. If Midnight stepped wrong, he punished him. If he shied, he punished him. If he stood too proud, he punished him for that too. I tried to soften what I could. Extra grain, quiet words, a hand on his neck when no one was watching. Her voice thinned. Then one evening, Mr. Blackroot came to the lower barn drunk and angry. Midnight had thrown him that morning. Not hard, just enough to bruise his pride. He took up a heated branding iron. Silas cursed under his breath, then caught himself. "Forgive me." Abigail did not look at him. I stepped between them. Clara's chest tightened. He shoved me aside. Midnight reared, not at me, at him. The wagon was too close. I fell against the wheel and the team hitched nearby panicked. Everything moved at once. Wood broke. The wagon lurched. I remember Midnight screaming. I remember trying to crawl and he stood over me. Her eyes filled now, but her voice stayed steady. He stood over me so the team would not trample me. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. Wyatt turned away, jaw tight. Silas stood with his hat crushed in both hands. "They said he attacked me," Abigail whispered. "By the time I woke, the story was already set. Mr. Blackroot said the stallion caused it. Clay Danner swore to it. Others repeated it. I could not stand. I could barely breathe without pain. And everyone looked at me like I should be grateful to be alive instead of troublesome enough to tell the truth." "Why did you leave?" Clara asked softly. "Because Blackroot told me if I spoke, Midnight would be destroyed that same day." Abigail looked up, eyes shining. "I was 19, hurt, alone. My mother was gone. I had no brother, no father, no husband. Just a horse they already hated and a truth no one wanted. So I stayed quiet. I let them send me away. I thought silence would save him." Her voice broke for the first time. But it did not save him. It only left him alone with the blame. Clara reached for her hand, then stopped just short, letting Abigail choose. After a moment, Abigail placed her fingers in Clara's. "I am ashamed," Abigail said. "No," Clara answered, and the word came fierce. "You were cornered." Abigail shook her head. "That is what I tell the girls here when they blame themselves for things done by stronger people. I tell them fear is not failure. Then at night, I forget to believe it for myself." Clara held her hand gently. "Maybe that is why we need someone else to say it back to us." Abigail looked at her then, truly looked. "Who are you?" Clara almost said Wyatt's wife, but stopped. "I am Clara Harlan," she said, "and I know what it is to run through a door because staying meant being swallowed." Abigail gave a small nod, as if that was answer enough. Wyatt stepped forward. "Miss Moore, Clay Danner is being held at Mercy Bend. The sheriff will be told what he confessed at the creek." Abigail's face paled at Clay's name. He confessed. That blackroot hurt Midnight, Wyatt said. That you were shoved, that the horse tried to get away. Silas cleared his throat, and I will swear to what I heard. Abigail looked at him. Why? Abigail closed her eyes. The late sun moved through the bare cottonwood branches, laying thin gold lines across her face. I want to see him, she said. Clara felt the whole story turn. Wyatt nodded. We can bring a wagon in the morning. No, Abigail said, opening her eyes. Tonight. It will be dark soon, Wyatt said. I waited 5 years, she replied. I will not wait another night. No one argued after that. They borrowed a small wagon from the mission. Abigail wrapped herself in a heavy shawl, and Clara sat beside her for the journey back. Wyatt rode ahead with a lantern. Silas followed behind, quiet as a man walking beside his own conscience. The road grew dark before they reached Mercy Bend. Stars appeared one by one in the clear sky left behind by the storm. The land smelled washed and cold. Abigail said little, but once, when the wagon passed a stand of pines, Clara heard her whisper, "Please remember me." At the ranch, lanterns burned in the yard. Rufus stood near the far corral with Eddie. The sheriff had not arrived yet. Clay remained locked in the feed room, silent now. Midnight Psalm stood near the fence. When Abigail stepped down from the wagon, the stallion lifted his head. Clara felt the air change. Abigail leaned hard on her cane and took one slow step forward. "Midnight," she whispered. The black horse went utterly still. Then, with a sound so low it was almost a sob, he walked to the fence and lowered his head. Midnight Psalm lowered his head to Abigail more, as if 5 years had become one breath. No one in the yard spoke. Lantern light trembled across the wet rails. The night had turned cold and clear after the storm, and every puddle in the yard held a broken piece of starlight. Abigail stood with one hand gripping her cane and the other pressed against her chest, as if her heart might step out before the rest of her could follow. "Midnight," she whispered again. The stallion gave a low sound deep in his throat. It was not a whinny. It was softer than that, rougher, almost like a grief too old for words. He stretched his neck over the top rail, careful in a way Clara had never seen from him, careful as if he remembered how easily a hurt body could break. Abigail lifted her shaking hand. Wyatt took one step forward, then stopped himself. Silas looked down. Rufus held Eddie back with a quiet hand on the boy's shoulder. Clara stood beside Abigail, close enough to catch her if her bad leg failed, but not close enough to steal the moment. Abigail's fingers touched the white mark on Midnight's face. The horse closed his eyes. A sound moved through the men, not speech, not even breath, but something broken open. For all their roughness, for all their doubts, they understood what they were seeing. Not a trick, not training, not a woman proving men wrong for pride's sake. They were seeing a reunion between two innocent souls who had been punished for surviving. "I am sorry," Abigail said, her voice cracking. "I thought silence would keep you alive." Midnight stood still beneath her touch. Clara's eyes burned. She looked at Wyatt and found his face wet, though whether from rain left in his hat brim or tears, she did not ask. Some truths deserved privacy even in the open air. The feed room door banged suddenly. Clay Danner shouted from inside, "You all hearing fairy tales out there? That woman was always soft in the head." Midnight's eyes snapped open. Abigail flinched. The old fear returned to her face so quickly that Clara felt anger rise like a flame. Wyatt turned toward the feed room, but the sheriff's voice came first from behind them. "That will be enough from you, Danner." Sheriff Amos Vale rode into the yard with Rufus's cousin beside him, both men dusty from hard travel. The sheriff was a square man with tired eyes and a gray mustache. He dismounted slowly, taking in the corral, the horse, Abigail, Clara, and Wyatt. I was told there was a confession, he said. There was, Wyatt answered. Clay shouted again, but weaker now. I confessed nothing worth writing. Silas stepped forward, hat in both hands. I heard him say Blackroot shoved Abigail. Heard him say the horse tried to get away. Heard him admit the story was turned against the animal. The sheriff looked at Silas. You stand by that? I do. Rufus nodded. So do I. Wyatt said, so do I. Then Clara stepped forward, and I do. Clay laughed from inside the feed room. A mail-order bride and a crippled girl, that is your truth. The yard went silent. Not because his words were strong, but because everyone heard how small they were. Abigail straightened. Her cane shook under her hand, but she did not step back. Open the door. Wyatt looked at her. You do not have to face him. Yes, Abigail said, I do. The sheriff nodded once. When the feed room door opened, Clay stood inside with straw on his coat and fear in his eyes. He tried to wear a sneer, but it slipped when he saw Abigail beside the corral. She did not shout. She did not curse him. She only reached into the pocket of her shawl and took out a small strip of faded blue cloth. Clay's face changed. Clara saw it, so did the sheriff. Abigail held the cloth up in the lantern light. You tore this from Midnight's mane the night of the accident. I had tied it there that morning. You told Mr. Blackroot I was making the horse soft. After I was hurt, you threw it at me and said no one would believe a girl who loved an animal more than her employer. The sheriff took the cloth carefully. Why keep it all these years? Abigail's voice steadied. Because when everyone tells you your memory is wrong, you keep one small thing that proves it is not. Clay looked away. That was enough. Not for a court, maybe not by itself, but truth had weight when carried by many hands, by Silas's shame, by Wyatt's witness, by Clara's courage, by Abigail's blue ribbon, by a horse who bowed his head to the woman he had once tried to protect. Sheriff Vale took Clay by the arm. You can finish your arguing in town. Clay did not fight. Men like him often seemed large only while others were afraid. As the sheriff led him away, Midnight stamped once, but he did not scream. He did not charge. He only watched the man go with Abigail's hand resting gently against his face. By morning, the story had already begun to change. Not into gossip, though some would try, into correction, into a truth spoken at the general store, at the livery, outside the church, and across Mercy Ben's breakfast table. Midnight's psalm had not caused Abigail Moore's ruin. He had tried to shield her. Clara Harlan had not been a foolish bride chasing danger. She had seen what stronger men had missed because they were too proud to look softly. Silas was the first to say it plain. At breakfast, he stood near the kitchen door with his hat against his chest. Mrs. Harlan, he said, then stopped. Clara, I was wrong. The room stilled. Clara looked up from pouring coffee. Silas swallowed. About the horse, about you, about what strength looks like. Eddie nodded quickly. Rufus grunted, same here, which from Rufus was nearly a hymn. Clara did not smile to make them comfortable. She let the apology stand long enough for them to feel it. Then she said, thank you. Weeks passed. Abigail stayed at Mercy Bend while the weather settled. She never rushed Midnight, and neither did Clara. Some days he allowed Abigail's hand on his face. Some days he stepped away. Some days Clara stood at the fence and spoke to him while he listened with one ear turned toward her. No one called him Gallows again. By the first clean snow of winter, Midnight's psalm walked beside Clara across the yard without a rope. The ranch hands came out to watch, but not as they had before. They did not wait for failure now. They watched like men witnessing the answer to a prayer they had been too stubborn to pray. Wyatt stood near the porch, his hat in his hands. Clara stopped beside him. Midnight stood at her shoulder, calm and proud, his breath white in the cold. You made this place better, Wyatt said softly. Clara looked across Mercy Bend Ranch. At the barn, the corral, the men, Abigail smiling through tears near the fence, and the black horse who had finally remembered he was more than what had been done to him. "No," she said, "we all stopped letting fear name us." Wyatt took her hand then, not to claim her, not to guide her, but to stand beside her. If this story reminded you that mercy can be stronger than judgment, carry that with you a little longer. Some hearts, like some horses, do not need breaking. They need someone brave enough to wait. As the sun rose over the snowy Montana hills, Midnight Psalm lowered his head between Clara and Abigail, peaceful at last. And for the first time since she had arrived as a bride nobody trusted, Clara Harlan looked at Mercy Bend and knew she had not merely found a home. She had helped make one.